let me just tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to found Pittsfield Prospers. As Dana said, I'm a retired professor. I'm a social psychologist. I grew up in Pittsfield and graduated from high school in 1961. And at that time, I looked around this beautiful environment to which I have returned and said, this place is absolutely too small for me. I am out of here. I am off to see the world. And I did that. I both traveled a great deal and I went to college in Pennsylvania. I went to graduate school in Michigan, and I'm an experimental social psychologist, and I spent over 4 years teaching both research methods and social psychology. So when I came back to the warm embrace of the Berkshires and my hometown, I started thinking about what I could contribute. I'm fortunate to have had a great deal of education in a field that opened my eyes not only to the importance of narrative, which is critically important, but also the importance of empirically supported efforts to create change. So I started listening carefully. The Pittsfield that I left in 1961 did not look very much like the Pittsfield to which I first returned, probably in the early 2000s. And actually, I was so taken aback by the enormous changes, because by that time my parents were deceased. My brother was living with his spouse and adult children in Rhode Island. So I didn't have that much occasion to come back, but I drove down North Street and the change had been so profound that I literally had tears in my eyes because I thought, what happened to my hometown? Well, we have seen a lot of progress toward a revival of Pittsfield, but from my perspective, one of the biggest difficulties was the tendency for people to continue almost 40 years later to repeat the woe are we, GE has left mantra that had become part of the social fabric of the community. And every time I heard that, and I heard it in so many different ways, people saying, oh, I can only go to the theater in Pittsfield. And as I'm sure you know, we have very rich arts and cultural offerings. I can only go there in the day because it's so dangerous. Or someone actually asked me if there were any nice houses in Pittsfield. And of course, it was someone who did not grow up in Pittsfield and was not familiar with all of the neighborhoods in Pittsfield. So depending on your familiarity and depending on the narrative, you might be inclined to think that if you'd only driven in a section of town that's under-resourced, that every place in Pittsfield looked like that. So I started to think about how I could use my knowledge to make a difference And one thing that's very clear to me is, and I taught many undergraduates this, and it's empirically based, silence is almost always interpreted as acquiescence. So, and I was guilty of it. When somebody said something like, are there any nice houses, or etc., I tended not to push back. And then I started to think about what I knew about pushing back, not in a hostile or aggressive way, but just simply countering a comment that, in order to perhaps open people's eyes to a different possibility. And one of the things that I knew from research stemming from actually the Second World War, coming out of the Institute for Social Research in Ann Arbor, was research about the importance of public commitment to creating change. And it was research that was done during the war at a time when the nation, this nation, was concerned about rationing and providing people with, here, not just who were abroad fighting, but here with available foods that they weren't used to eating, such as organ meats. And of course, many of us have traveled to the United Kingdom, where we have enjoyed steak and kidney pie. But a lot of us who did not grow up eating liver or kidney or other organ meats, kind of wondered about whether we would enjoy those foods. The research that was done in Ann Arbor during the war was an effort to see what would work to get people to consume recipes distributed by nutritionists and social scientists at the Institute for Social Research. And what they found, I won't get into the research design, was that if you bring people into an auditorium, you present a talk about the value nutritionally and also economically, and as part of, at that time, of course, the narrative had to do with supporting the war effort, and ask them distributed recipes, and then ask people to commit publicly to trying those recipes. Hands went up. And when the hands went up and they did the follow-up study, what did they find? They found that the experimental group, those who had been asked to make a public commitment, were many times more likely, certainly statistically significantly more likely, to, at the follow-up several weeks later, to report that they had both tried the recipes and were inclined to try again. They were surprised a little bit often, but that this was something they thought they could continue to do, and their family was not repelled. I don't know if they advertised the contents of the recipes, of course. Knowing this, and much research that's been done since then, I thought one of the things we need to do is to provide people with the opportunity to make a public commitment. And so what we did was to create the Pittsfield Prospers Pledge. And we offered people an opportunity to sign that pledge. and I'm going to quickly read it to you. I believe in a better future for Pittsfield. I believe in its capacity to grow, adapt, and thrive. I respect its history and the work of many people and local organizations helping the city to prosper. I support the champions of Pittsfield's past, present, and future, regardless of gender, race, religion, or class. I commit to fostering pride in our city by finding and sharing positive stories with friends, family, and acquaintances. I do this to celebrate Pittsfield. And so we then kept track, of course. We had several hundred people who signed the pledge, and they were on a mailing list. And we also did the other kinds of things that are important in the 21st century to promote any kind of activity. For example, we were publicly as present as we possibly could be. We tabled when we had public opportunities at the farmers market, on the Pittsfield Commons, on third Thursday nights during the summer that happen once a week. And of course, you've got to have swag. And we did. We had Pittsfield Prospers pins that we encouraged people to wear everywhere they went. And you've got to use, in my experience and my reading about other similar efforts to this, every form of communication that is available to you. And I think this is one of the greatest challenges, because to bring a community together with a common goal in these times is difficult, given that the generations have very clear preferences for modes of communication. Pittsfield Prospers tried hard to bring in multi-generational individuals into this effort. And I have to say that it took me quite a while to be comfortable with Instagram. But you've got to do all of these channels if you want to reach everyone in the community. And when I say, of course, all of these channels, I mean every channel available: print, Facebook, Instagram. And I sometimes would go to community meetings and I would note our difficulties in getting messages out of any kind. And I would jokingly say I thought I'd solved the problem, that I was going to, in a blast from the past, buy a truck and a huge megaphone with an amplifier and drive through the streets announcing upcoming events. And it was startling how many people said, that's a really good idea. Well, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek idea. I'm not sure it would have worked very well and people might have found it disruptive. But the fact that people nodded their heads about it's being a good idea, I think is a testament to how difficult it is to communicate across generations with different preferences for different modes of communication. You also have to reach out to every segment of the community in a different kind of way as you formulate your mission. Our mission was to change the narrative to a positive narrative and celebrate Pittsfield. And so I elicited support from an advisory board comprised of leaders of the local religious community, the educational community, the superintendent of schools, the community, the Berkshire Community College president, for example, the arts community, the business community, and there was a representative of each of those communities very well connected to their segment of that community on the advisory board. I also drafted a group of Pittsfield Prospers promoters. They were and are our cheerleaders. And it doesn't hurt at all to have a mascot. And I have a standard poodle who was always in his public appearances decked out in swag. And he is Winton, Pittsfield's Prosperous poodle. And he became very recognizable in the community, even when he wasn't wearing his little winter sweater with the Pittsfield Prospers logo on it. And people would call out, hey, there's Winton, there's Pittsfield's Prosperous poodle. So he became certainly more notable in the community than I. So as I said, these were all efforts to focus attention on changing the narrative and drawing in members of the community. And there are numerous resources available in our community, and I know in yours as well. And so I had some high school interns who worked with me, who certainly helped me with things like Instagram and in kind of learning the language, if you will, of their generation. And that was very useful. Williams College is their community in action umbrella, which hosts many organizations, and you're very close to them, as are we. It's just a matter of whether you're going north or south. Are available. Many of them are very interested in learning about community organization, and they have wonderful skills to offer. So I suggest that that's a place that I looked, and I got some assistance in doing some public service announcements that we aired on the Pittsfield Prospers website, as well as made available on the Facebook page. And then we also used our local public television station. And that was really important because one of the things that we had not anticipated, of course, none of us really had, none of us probably, well, perhaps a few worldwide, was the pandemic and the impact that it had on shutting down public events. And that's why we're all as skilled as we are. And that's a continuum, which we've noted today, with using Zoom. And for many of us who are older, it was a challenge. And of course, for the younger people, they embraced it with glee. So we moved onto Zoom. We moved onto PCTV with a very short-lived, unfortunately, program called Pittsfield Prospers that I co-hosted along with Pittsfield's Prosperous Poodle. People always enjoyed seeing him. And we interviewed people from this area, either people who had grown up here or people who had found Pittsfield because of a move or by accident. That happens sometimes as well, looking for a beautiful place to which to retire. So we tried to get people to think about what they most valued about our community. And I'll give you the top three. As a researcher, of course, at public events, I would ask people to leave behind cards that would answer that question. Number one, the most valued thing was the community. Number two was the environment. And number three, the arts and cultural opportunities. And that was across every segment of the people who attended the many different kinds of events that we sponsored when we were person to person, and that we actually tried to continue over Zoom, but that was not quite as successful. Having grown up in this area, my father, my late father was from Cambridge. And his father was a dairy farmer there. I was certainly very familiar with Bennington. We often drove through Bennington on the way to visit my father's family. And after I was invited to do this, I thought back to what I knew about Bennington and how conscious I was of its strengths, as well as the fact that I know that the mills are gone. And so I took a drive a week ago through your wonderfully rich community, and I noted that the rich history, which a lot of which I guess I had not been on my recent radar screen. It's a very diverse and vibrant community. The environment is beyond splendid. And the arts and cultural opportunities are strong. And I have to segue for a moment. My father was an architect. It made me a bit different in my public schooling education, because almost all of my peers' fathers, and it usually at that time was fathers, worked for GE, and people would look at me kind of strangely because they thought it was odd that my father didn't work for General Electric. And he was very artistic, as is often true, of course, of architects. And I remember with great fondness the time that I met Grandma Moses at my father's urging. And I mean, that's another piece of your rich and vibrant history in the Bennington Museum. And of course, you've got those wonderful covered bridges and the Covered Bridge Museum. So many, many opportunities. The challenges that we felt we faced, and this is quite an incomplete story because we don't know now what's the next chapter is going to look like. But one of the challenges is pulling all of the aspects of the community together to share a vision around, for example, changing the narrative or boosting Bennington. I think one of the best approaches that we found, apart from being as visible as possible, was sticking with what I thought of as the intergenerational edge. We had planned to host an intergenerational event in the Commons of Pittsfield with a DJ and invite each generation to come and enjoy a segment of a summer evening, dancing to the music that they most loved in their generation. And then the plan was that in the breaks between segments, we would ask people to seek out, to divide into groups that were intergenerational, and the generation that was the Dick Clark generation would share with smaller groups what they found wonderful about the music of their era. And then each generation, and that we were thinking in terms of 5, ranging from boomers and beyond through the youngest segment, generation I, which they're now being called, so that it would be a shared experience. And I think that that is an edge. And I just want to conclude by thanking you for your attention and saying that my recent trip to Bennington excited me with the richness of the opportunities that I think you have. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Virginia. Does anybody have any questions? All right, I'll throw one out there. So I've had a chance to look at your website, seen many great pictures of Winton.
Yes, he was our star.
I'm sure that's a huge help. What have you seen in terms of the biggest tangible benefits from Pittsfield Prospers efforts?
That's a really good question. And I think there was enormous excitement building for the effort. And we got a lot of, good press. I did a lot. I always sent out press releases. I always put in the local newspaper, in the event calendar, et cetera. And I think we were moving forward when we had to shut down. And I don't know, frankly, what it's going to look like when we are in person again, whether we can get that momentum back. And there's a piece of it that's going to be starting over. And frankly, every organization is, whether it's a not-for-profit or et cetera, is wondering what the future holds and how to navigate it. And I think Pittsfield Prospers is in that same place. The enthusiasm, give you an example. We got a group of people on our advisory board and our promoters to march in the 4th of July parade, which is a very traditional and beloved event in Pittsfield. And we ask the marchers to carry, and there are lots of regulations about, you can't really carry a stick, but you can carry a marshmallow, a wooden marshmallow stick, because they're not considered to be potentially injury producing. So we handed out magic markers, and we invited people to write what they most valued about Pittsfield on, and then to carry them with them. So it was those kinds of things. And as we walked down, with many other people on a very hot day, which was why Witten wasn't allowed to come with us, people called out and cheered. There was real excitement. Now, if this had not been interrupted, it is my hope. I had some commitments from local store owners who were stores that were empty and undergoing renovation, while they were waiting for new people to lease the space, to put in historic exhibits of Pittsfield's history, for example. We had plans for using an iPhone walk through the city to guide people to places of historic interest. Northampton is a wonderful example of a community that has really leveraged that technology, and I think changed the dynamic of their community in part with that. If you're familiar with James Fallows and his wife, Deborah, who wrote a book entitled Our Towns, they traveled around the country looking at communities that had suffered a decline, most often because of the exit of a kind of single manufacturing community that had exited, as was the Pittsfield story. Many of the mill towns in New England, of course, have. The closest one to us is Burlington. And their experience is worth taking a careful look at. I was working on getting somebody from that community to come in and give a public talk when things changed, and it wasn't clear when we were going to get back together again. But I think those kinds of efforts can be instrumental, but it takes everyone in the community to foster this. And as somebody who is a researcher and who has written grants, for example, because that was part of what I had to do in my academic life, the best thing that you can do to prepare yourself for successful financial support is to demonstrate the level of accomplishment that has occurred with your initiative. And that's why I was so carefully tracking things like, visits, the number of likes, the number of visits to the web page, et cetera, because I looked toward, and I was really looking at the possibility of local not necessarily, national. Most of my experience was with, NSF and research-based national organizations. But the same thing applies. And we have a number of foundations that support local efforts, but you need to go to them with not just a proposal, but with a demonstrated success as well. And that takes a village.
All right, anybody else have anything you want to mention? Any questions? And we got started a little late, so, you still keep going a bit. Jonah, do you have something you want to mention? Thought you might have raised your hand there. Is that just...
I didn't, but I did want to comment just Virginia, kudos to you in your retirement to choose this as an effort and thing to do. What a wonderful benefit for the town of Pittsfield.
Well, thank you. None of us foresaw as I said, the momentum building effort in the beginning was terrific. And then we just had to pause and pivot and pause and pivot and pause and pivot. And it's very hard to know what's going to emerge from that. Once I saw that the intergenerational meetups were not being well attended on Zoom, which it didn't surprise me, but as a numbers person, I was tracking that. I thought, what else can I do to be of use? And one of the things that I did, using my background as a social psychologist, was to approach our PCTV station, and Pittsfield Prospers was a community member of the station, and do some PSAs about sort of highlighting tools to promote resilience in a time of great stress. Nothing clinical, just, simple recommendations. Take a forest bath. We know empirically that getting outside and walking and enjoying the awe of nature actually has a physiological benefit. You can find awe in your living room just by focusing on a beloved object and thinking about how it makes you happy, where you got it, remembering the people associated with it, things like that. I'm not licensed as a clinician. I was not doing any kind of therapy. I was just trying to help people who we know are enormously stressed and have been because of the isolation and uncertainty, prosper.
Yeah, people should definitely check out the Pittsfield Prospers website, Facebook page. There's a lot of good stuff there. So,
please do.
Yeah.
And the way that you can get in touch with me through the webpage if you want, or you could also, if you have questions about starting a Bennington initiative, I'd be happy to chat with you.
That sounds great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much and thanks for coming up and looking around the town too.
Good luck.